All right, we're about to dive into an idea that's almost 1,700 years old, but you know what? It feels like it was written for today. It's a concept that could totally reshape how you think about the whole science versus faith debate. Let's get into it.
So, let's just start with this bombshell, shall we? We're always told that science and religion are enemies, that they're locked in this epic battle. But what if I told you that one of history's greatest saints wasn't just okay with science, but was actually thinking in ways that modern physics would only prove right centuries and centuries later?
To really understand this, we've got to go back in time, way back, to the 4th century to meet our main character, St. Gregory of Nyssa. And believe me, for his time, his approach was nothing short of radical. It basically flipped the entire science and faith argument on its head.
Now, when you hear 4th century theologian, you might picture a guy who's just locked away from the world. But that wasn't Gregory at all. As you can see from his work, he was completely plugged into the science of his day. We're talking physics, cosmology, the whole shebang. He wasn't just reading scripture. He was actively trying to connect it with all the Greek scientific knowledge available to him.
And this right here is the absolute key. For Gregory, a new scientific discovery wasn't a threat to his faith, not at all. He saw science as this amazing tool, almost like a magnifying glass that let him get a closer look at the incredible details of creation. He literally ran towards science, not away from it.
To really appreciate just how revolutionary Gregory's idea was, we have to first understand the much more common way of thinking, a flawed approach that, honestly, a lot of people still use today. It's called the God of the Gaps.
So, the God of the Gaps idea works like this. You find a hole in our scientific knowledge, right? Something like the origin of life, or what came before the Big Bang. And you just plug that hole with God. The answer becomes, well, God did it. It basically turns God into a placeholder for what we don't know yet.
But you can probably see the huge problem here, right? It sets up this constant battle. Every time science explains something that used to be a mystery, the gap gets smaller. And if that's where God lives, then God's territory shrinks too. It creates this image of a God who's always retreating, getting pushed back by human knowledge.
And this is where we see Gregory's genius. He just completely inverts the logic. Instead of using theology to fill the gaps in science, he used science to fill in the gaps in his theology. He used it to better understand the how of creation. And the result? You don't get a God who retreats. You get a God whose vast, brilliant, creative process is slowly revealed more and more with every new discovery.
So, how did he do this? Well, Gregory proposed this breathtakingly elegant idea about the cosmos. He called it one impulse, many events. Let's break down what he meant by that.
Gregory argued that creation wasn't a bunch of separate magic tricks. Instead, he said it all started with a single, simultaneous impulse from God. He described it as a seminal power, which is a great way to put it. It means it contained the seeds, the potential for everything that would ever exist.
Think of it like this. A single acorn contains all the potential to become a massive, complex oak tree. The impulse from God was the acorn, but for the tree to actually exist, that potential has to unfold over time, right? Through natural processes following its own internal rules. For Gregory, the universe worked exactly the same way.
Now, this might sound a bit abstract, but Gregory made it really concrete for people. He used a simple physics analogy from his day. He asked people to imagine what happens when you mix up a bunch of different liquids like mercury, water, and oil. Okay, so you shake them all up, and at first, you just have a chaotic mess. But then, you just let it sit. Natural processes take over. The elements separate themselves out based on their own properties. The heaviest stuff, the mercury, sinks. The lightest stuff, the oil, rises. And the water settles in the middle. Gregory argued the universe did the same thing. It started as one unified whole, and then, by following natural laws, it structured and diversified itself.
And this brings us to the most incredible part of his whole argument. Because by using the science of his day to explain creation, Gregory arrived at an intuition that is just, well, astounding.
He wrote that as the universe sorted itself out from that initial unity, the different elements were constantly distancing themselves from one another. Just let that phrase sink in for a minute.
Distancing themselves from one another. That is a perfect plain language description of an expanding universe. A 4th century theologian was describing a core concept of modern cosmology more than 1,500 years before we had the tools to prove it. That's the power of his approach. By trying to understand the how, he stumbled upon a profound truth.
So for him, finding out the universe is expanding wouldn't have caused a crisis of faith. It would have been a moment of complete awe. It would have just revealed the sheer elegance and genius of the method God used. You see, science wasn't the enemy of faith, it was its most insightful storyteller.
And this really brings us back to the core idea, which is summed up perfectly here. The goal isn't to cram theology into the holes of a science textbook. The real project, the one Gregory was on, is to let science fill in the magnificent details of the theological story, to show us the actual brushstrokes of the masterpiece.
So, the final question is this. What if we actually applied Gregory's approach today? In a world that seems so full of conflict between different ways of seeing things, what could possibly change if we stopped looking for gaps to plug and started looking for details waiting to be filled in?